Tranquility du Jour, November 5th, 2018. Hello there, this is Kimberly Wilson, and welcome to the 433rd edition of Tranquility du Jour, a podcast featuring artists, activists, and authors around the globe spreading inspiration. And today, I'm really excited. I have 3 guests on the show, and we're talking about our journey into getting a certificate in applied positive psychology with my 3 classmates, Alisha, Alexis, and Carol. So you're going to hear our takeaways from this 6-month, 240-hour program and how we're incorporating our takeaways into our daily lives. You'll also hear a bit about what our final projects were. Now, before I dive in, I want to just mention what is positive psychology. So, according to Psychology Today, it's the scientific study of what makes life most worth living. It is a call for psychological science and practice to be as concerned with strength as with weakness, as interested in building the best things in life as in repairing the worst, and as concerned with making the lives of people fulfilling as with healing pathology. So before we dive into today's piece, where I'm also going to be sharing my takeaways and we're going to be hearing from these 3 other beautiful guests, I wanted to mention a few things that are happening and coming up. The first of which is my last in-person event this year is going to be the New Year's mini retreat happening at Tringle Space/Yoga Works in DuPont Circle on December 31st from 2 to 5. So this was an annual event that I host, and I'm really excited to be back offering this. And if you're interested or will be in the DC area, there's a link in the show notes, kimberlywilson.com/TDJ433. I'm also going to be offering a New Year's salon, doing some vision board work, some reflection, and that's going to happen on January 1st. So stay tuned for those details. I may have an online component to it, but I'm also thinking it's going to be an in-person experience. So again, that's on New Year's Day, which I can't believe we're already talking about New Year's. And then our next TDJ Live, which is a free event, is happening on Sunday, January 6th. My next writing salon is January 12th, and that's an in-person event in Washington, D.C. And here's what a few people had to say about the last one. Thank you so much for all your valuable insights on Saturday. The writing salon was the perfect opportunity for me to jump back into writing in a lovely and encouraging setting. Someone else, Justine, says, Kimberly gave us a room of our own to imagine and grow our writing selves. What a gift she gave to shine a light on all the ways we are writers in the world and dream of the writing to come, all while fueled on yummy snacks, teas, and the wisdom of a welcoming group of women. So if you are interested in the writing process and or want to be doing more writing in the new year, join me for this. Again, that's January 12th. And then our next 4-week Tranquility Salon starts on January 13th. And this is a 4-week gathering on Sunday evenings in my therapy office space, where we'll explore everything from self-care to goals and dreams to creativity and mindfulness. You can learn more about this also in the show notes. Now, if you'd like to escape for a indulgent retreat, and when I say indulgent, it's immersive, meaning it is an entire week together. Yoga, creativity, and mindfulness. I'm doing 2 next year, one in Costa Rica in February, and the early bird ends on December 1st. And then the next one is Tranquility in Tuscany, and that's July. And there are 8 spots left in that if you're interested. So I'd love, love, love to have you. And as always, if you have any questions about any of these offerings, please don't hesitate to reach out. So here are the guests you're going to hear from today. First, Carol Meyer. She's a Washington, D.C.-based life coach and mentor, a positive psychology practitioner, and a strategic communications consultant. She blends the science of well-being and the art of mindfulness to help clients create a joyful life in alignment with their values and purpose. Her top 5 VIA character strengths are gratitude, love of learning, perspective, kindness, and hope, with appreciation of beauty, creativity, and curiosity rounding out the top 8. Learn more at carolmyers.com. Alexis Buckles. She's a health and wellness coach working in both private and corporate settings. In addition to being a certified health coach, she also holds a BA in Global Affairs and is certified in Applied Positive Psychology. Outside of coaching, she shares her passion for holistic well-being through her Living Well and Wild community and her upcoming journal, The Book of Extraordinary Things. She lives in Northern Virginia with her husband Chris and a precocious border collie mix named Ripley, who I've met and is adorable. She enjoys eating vegan food, fencing, and reading epic fantasy stories. You can learn more about Alexis at livingwellandwild.com. Alisha Wolferts is a leadership, life, and creativity coach who specializes in working with women, walking as a guide with fellow women seekers on their path towards clarity of purpose. Alisha is a positive psychology practitioner and weaves positive psychology, yoga, and creativity together while working with clients to ensure them a journey to flourishing. She coaches individuals and groups, leads workshops and retreats that inspire you to move north of neutral, which is a positive psychology statement or saying north of neutral. She's the host of the Yoke and Abundance Wise Women podcast, and she believes that when we as women realize and step into our own power, we make the whole world a brighter place. You can learn more about Alisha at yokeandabundance.com. Again, a link to all of their websites can be found at kimberlywilson.com/TDJ433. So I wanted to share, before we hear from Carol, Alisha, and Alisha, I wanted to share just a few of my takeaways. And what's funny is I started going through my notes, which is a lot of material. And I kind of stopped around weekend 2 because I had so much I wanted to share. So I'll do more of this in the future, of sharing a bit more from my takeaways and the ways in which I'm incorporating this, because it really was a profound experience. It was last October through March. March is when we graduated. And it was really intense in the fact that we had, entire weekends together once a month. We had 7 of those. Then we also had weekly calls that were an hour and a half. And then we also had all these kind of weekly videos and readings and things along those lines to be doing in between the sessions. So it was a lot of material. And so I just want to touch on a few things that kind of stood out from the early parts of my positive psychology experience. So first thing was this thing they call the happiness formula. And I thought this was just really interesting. So the happiness formula is H equals S plus C plus V. So I'll tell you what those mean. So H is our overall level of happiness. S is our set point, our biological set point. C is conditions, our life conditions. And V is voluntary activities. So basically, voluntary activities means what's controllable. Life conditions means what's situational. And genetic is what our biological set point is. So what's interesting about this too is that our overall level of happiness is based 50% on genetics, 10% on our situations, and 40% on what's controllable. Isn't that fascinating? I thought that was just so interesting because the study of happiness is such a popular thing these days. And of course, we all want to be happy. And yet this is just very interesting to think about, these are what contribute to our happiness. The good news is 40% of it is controllable. So the next piece that stands out is mindset. So mindset, and this is something we talked about a lot in the program, is fixed mindset and growth mindset. So fixed mindset is judging and focused on outcome, right? It's all about the end goal. Whereas a growth mindset is learning and it's more focused on the process. So one of the pieces that I wrote here is that mindsets become self-fulfilling prophecies. They can be learned and changed. So what areas of your life do you have a fixed or growth mindset in? And I have here, I have failed, quotes, versus I am a failure, right? Or measuring mindset is this idea of I can't do it ... yet. So it's this idea, right, of rather than I'm a failure, it's I have failed, which I think is just an important way to shift, like this identifying with what has happened versus saying that I have failed in this situation, in this relationship, or what have you, but it doesn't mean that I am a failure. So again, growth mindset, that's what we want, and that's focused on learning and on the process, not on judging, and focused on the outcome. Another piece that we talked about is the ABCs of CBT. CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy, and it's actually a course. There's so much out there on CBT, but I'm actually in a 6-week course right now that's going on, and there's so much to learn about CBT. It's so fascinating. I think the biggest piece to keep in mind is that our thoughts create our emotions. All right, so the ABCs of CBT here is CBT. And these are the notes I took. Relationship between our thoughts, our feelings, and our action. So we change our life experience by shifting our life beliefs. And we get to our beliefs by accessing our mind chatter. So that's our thoughts. So A is our adversity or the activating event. You could also say trigger, right? This is our negative event or circumstance that arises. Like right now, it's pouring outside, in Washington, D.C. So, for some people, that could be a negative event or circumstance, right? As they're trying to get to a job interview or something along those lines. So B is our beliefs about it. It's our interpretations, attributions, or expectations. Like a belief could be, oh my gosh, I'm going to be so disheveled. There's no way I'm going to get this job, blah, blah, blah. And C, consequences is our consequence, and that is our feelings and behaviors, right? So we show up to our job interview feeling defeated. We, may not behave as confident because we may look like a little drowned rat, so kind of thinking about what is the adversity, our beliefs about it, and the consequences. Okay, so what I wrote here too that's really important is that we recognize that our key to resilience is to know your mind chatter, right? So to understand what's going on in my mind. So the A is the fact, raining outside. B is the belief, which is our thoughts. And then C, consequences, how you feel and do, behave. So this is just interesting to keep in mind again as we explore, the concept of CBT, and I'll talk more about that in future podcasts. And I also have, interviewed some people who have incorporated that into their interviews, particularly therapists around things such as stress, depression, anxiety. And CBT is a really, really powerful tool to get more in touch with what are our thoughts and how those are affecting our lives. So again, getting in touch with our mind chatter. So ABCs of CBT, that was a really helpful piece. And then I just have a few more I wanted to mention, and then we will move into our discussions with the other lovely ladies. So this is interesting too. There are 12 pieces of the happiness strategy according to positive psychology. So number 1 is expressing gratitude. Number 2, cultivating optimism. Number 3, avoid social comparison. Asking yourself, really, will this matter in a year? Number 4, practice kindness. Number 5, nurturing our social relationships. Number 6, learning to forgive or let go. Number 7, empathy. Number 8, flow experience. That's really being in the zone. If you're interested more in the concept of flow, check out Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi. I'll have a link in the show notes to his book Flow. He's written a lot of wonderful things about flow. Number 9, savor joys of life. Number 10, commit to goals. Number 11, spiritual. And number 12, mind-body connection. So again, this is our happiness strategy according to positive psychology. Okay, 2 more things. The negativity bias. All right, so we have a negativity bias that is evolutionary, and it helps us see kind of what is wrong in the moment or what's challenging in the moment, and that's what actually allowed us to survive. Now, the important thing to know here is that we can shift that so that we can begin to see more of the positives. And what we started with talking about here is emotional intelligence. And it was defined as the ability to identify and name the emotion in the moment. And why it's so important to be able to name the emotion is that it helps to calm the amygdala down whenever we can give words to our emotions. And what was interesting too is how to combat negativity bias was gratitude, growth mindset, being on the learner path, which means you're always trying to learn, and then exercise. Interesting, right? So here's an example of some thoughts I don't want. Like, I don't want to be unclear about my future. So a way to reframe that is, I want a 1-year to a 5-year plan. Another thought is, I don't want to waste time. Okay, what do I want? I want to spend more time on what matters. So I just thought that was an interesting piece. Change focus to what I do want. Your beliefs become the lens through which you see the world, and you can change them. Isn't that helpful and beautiful? I love all the helpful tools that I took away from positive psychology, and I use them a lot with my mentoring and therapy clients and honestly, with myself. Now, without further ado, let's hear from Carol, Alexis, and Alisha. Welcome, Carol.
Hi, Kimberly.
So thanks for being here today to chat about our experience in the Positive Psychology Certificate Program.
It was quite an adventure. Thank you, Kimberly.
What drew you to positive psychology?
Well, I think that my interest in positive psychology really predated my awareness of the field or discipline of positive psychology. When I learned that there was a part of psychology that looked at strengths as important as weaknesses, I thought, oh my God, this is so amazing. I wanted to learn more. I wanted to dive deeper and knew that there was a program at the University of Pennsylvania. I think there's a program in the UK also that one can earn a master's degree in positive psychology, but that wasn't in the stars for me in terms of timing and resources. And then I learned about a program through the Flourishing Center in New York, and I thought, this is it. I knew I had to take it.
Yeah, it was so fun to do the program with you. You know, it was, listeners, it was 7 full weekends from like 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., or I guess it was 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. And over the course of 6 months. So it was quite the journey.
Right, it was actually 240 hours because in addition to the on-site work, which was really great, being able to learn with a group of people with our cohort from the DC area, is that we also had video conference calls almost every week in between. Lots of video and reading content that were supplied by the school that we were exposed to. So that really covered everything from the origins of positive psychology, where it came from, what the theories behind it are, and then all of the practical applications and tools. And this program in particular was really heavily based on the research. So for me, as somebody who is really curious and always wants to know why or how, it was really nice to blend all the self-improvement work, with the rooting in science, and peer-reviewed, journal published, research.
So what would you say are some of your biggest takeaways from the experience?
Some cognitive-based techniques to manage negative mind chatter, to deal with thinking traps, how to rebound from emotional triggers. Those are some of the things that I first think of, some really solid practical tools. Because some people may consider positive psychology as like the science of happiness, and some people describe it as such. But I really see it as being able to manage the ups and downs of negative and positive thoughts and experience in our life, and learning how to look at a situation through a pessimistic frame or through an optimistic frame. It's like you can learn, with like realistic optimism, you can learn ways of looking at our habits, our thoughts, and our beliefs, because these all turn into our life experiences. So there's one of the techniques that we learned that is called ABC, which is a cognitive-based tool where you look at an activating event, something that arises in our life or some encounter we have or challenge. We look at the belief, what happened, what became of this or why, and then what are the consequences and how that affects our thoughts or emotions. Some of what I learned was how to reframe triggers, how to deal with negative mind chatter, and how to shift from pessimistic thinking or dealing or reacting to an event to learned optimism.
What is so beautiful, I think, about positive psychology that you mentioned at the beginning is the fact that it really focuses on what's right with you and how to enhance that versus what's wrong with you. And, which is more of the medical model. And with learned optimism, I'm sure a lot of our listeners are like, I would love to be more optimistic. And so can you tell us a little bit about what was your takeaway with regard to learned optimism?
That negative thinking or negative thoughts or fixed mindset can all be self-fulfilling prophecies where it can really spiral downward. In fact, I think that science shows that when one is in a negative space, that the peripheral vision actually narrows, and that might be something that's related to a primitive desire to focus when there is some crisis or some threat. The other side of that is looking at things with an optimistic point of view, where there's more expansive, there's this broaden and build and spiral upward. It's almost like the lens on a camera is open just a little bit wider so you can see a little more broadly. And I think that that's a really beautiful illustration of how we deal with challenges in our life, where we can, head down the negative rabbit hole, or we can pause and learn from it, and maybe dispute something with evidence that we may have, or challenge something. But that's what it means to me, that there are, experiences that we have or emotions that we have, like sadness or fear or anger. But those in mild quantities can help us identify a loss, help us identify danger, or identify something that we really need to take deliberate, active steps to move beyond.
Well, and what I love too that you mentioned just regarding thoughts, that reminds me of the idea of taking your thoughts to court, which I just love that idea, where it's like, but do you know beyond a reasonable doubt that is true? Are you sure? 100% sure, So that's, I thought that was a really good takeaway too. Now, how are you incorporating positive psychology in your personal life and or your work?
I'm including it in many, many ways. It's so much a framework of how I approach and show up in my life, and whether I'm working with a client that's an organization or I'm working with individuals, and whether I'm coaching or whether I'm teaching or whether I'm consulting. And it's really helpful in terms of showing up, whole, authentic, learning from the experience. I think that there's a lot of work that's also a part of the work that we studied about resilience, learning how to bounce back better from challenges or disappointments. So that's helpful for me as I deal, with in my individual personal life, and then also working with clients or with clients to ensure that they have, that they can experience, those so-called negative experiences, but then come back stronger from them.
What was your final project? So listeners, we had to pull together a final project that was somehow representative of the time that we'd spent in the program, and, and it could be anything. And so could you talk a little bit about your final project was and why you chose it?
So I wanted to assimilate the work that we covered in all of the modules, across the whole wellness spectrum. And I wanted to include that science of positive psychology, blending it with the art of mindfulness, in the way that I approach working with coaching and mentoring clients. So I call it Zen Kur living. And it's the kind of the framework that I use when I coach with people. And it was actually, my project was putting together my website, where I used the content to kind of articulate what all of that means for me. So the Zen piece, the Zen piece of it is, I think of it as one's self-awareness, their presence in the world, and we can use flourishing skills to help increase optimism, to decrease mind chatter, and to, reshape the brain. The second piece of it, cur, is the French word for heart. It's based in the Latin for courage. I think it's a little bit deeper than that. It's kind of the lens of your values and strengths. It's how you set goals, how you meet goals. Gratitude plays a big part in this. And it's how you align your life with the vision that you have for yourself. It's how you show up in the world and how you interact with others. And that leads into the living piece of it, which is kind of the spirit, the life, and how we interact with the world around us. I think that Dr. Seligman, when he founded positive psychology and through his training of people, is really intent on bringing it out into organizations and systems to really help, in an altruistic way, the betterment of society. So I think that as individuals, we can learn and we can grow and cultivate resilience, curiosity, and creativity to really make a difference in our lives, but especially in the lives of others. So that's what my final project looked like.
And it's beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah. So is there anything else you'd like others to know about positive psychology or, in particular, any books that you'd recommend that you're like, here is a great gateway into positive psychology?
Well, I think that Martin Seligman's Flourish is an excellent treatise on the whole topic of well-being. And in well-being, he finds 5 different pillars or components of it. And it's the abbreviation PERMA, which is positivity, engagement, relationships, meaning, and achievement or accomplishment. So he dives deeper into that piece of it. And then a tool that's free, that's online, that millions of people around the world have taken is the VIA Character Strengths Test. You can take it at UPenn, has a link to it on their website. One easy platform to work with the tool on is the VIA Character Institute at viacharacter.org. And it's an online test that takes about 10 or 15 minutes. And it gives you a different way of looking at the things that are important to you in your life. So they're not necessarily talents or skills, but they're values that you hold. And this tool was developed after an extensive review of the literature and interviews across cultures and socioeconomic demographic backgrounds to find these 24 character strengths and traits in people. So that's a really great tool for self-exploration. And there are resources on that website to help you understand it and put it better in context. So you can use it individually, you can use it as within your family, or if you're raising children to understand your children better or help them understand themselves, or you can use it in organizations, formally or informally. The program offered so much that I would encourage people to, if they're interested in diving deeper, is that there are a lot of resources in the field that are represented through the PERMA model that I talked about. You can find online. Just as another way just to deepen your appreciation or understanding for something like, gratitude or meaning or relationships in life. Lots of tools out there.
Yeah, it was. We were kind of inundated with tools, right? I mean, in a good way.
Right. It reminded me of our yoga teacher training, is that once you complete the 200 hours, then the real learning begins, because you begin to assimilate all of this and really work with the material that you've been exposed to.
Yeah. And you realize, kind of like with yoga teacher training, there is still so much to learn. And so my last question for you is, the name of this podcast is Tranquility du Jour. So how do you find tranquility in your everyday?
So I think that it's really situational, and where I am right now in my life, it's really about focusing and being quiet and really finding silence. And I think that is, for me, a form of self-care. It's self-compassion. It's literally turning off the noise. It might be a function of city living or the 24-hour-a-day news cycle, but it's a really great place to find some solace, just listening to the voice within.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Carol.
Thank you, Kimberly.
Welcome, Alexis.
Hi, Kimberly. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here and chatting about your positive psychology experience. And so let's start off with really, I'm curious, what drew you to the 6-month, 7-weekend positive psychology program?
Yeah, so I'm actually a certified holistic health and wellness coach. And during my wellness coach training, there were some general positive psychology type interventions that were kind of generally touched on during our training. So things like, of course, active listening, the trans-theoretical model of change, things like that. What else was there? Oh, mindfulness-based stress reduction. And so after my coach training, I kind of, had my notes with me that I took back. And I decided that there were a few of those subjects that I wanted to dig a little deeper on, in hopes that they would help me to provide more value to my coaching clients.
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense. And you must have loved the weekend on coaching then.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It brought me right back to that training that I went through. And actually, before I found the Flourishing Center, I actually took a very, very basic course through the Coursera website, just like a little free, I think it was like a 4 or 5 module introductory course to positive psychology. And that left me wanting a little bit more. So then just the Google search brought me again to the Flourishing Center and to the program that we went through.
And so what would you say are some of your, oh, by the way, I signed up for that Coursera course also, maybe a few summers ago, and I didn't do any of it. You know, sometimes when I'm great at signing up for online things and yet I don't necessarily follow through. So I'm proud of you for doing it, but there's something about like showing up, you know, every like, you know, fourth weekend or whatever in person that allowed me to, you know, actually dive into the material.
Oh, absolutely. And I feel like I think I was doing it on breaks during my job at the time, like my lunch break. So it was just a nice thing for me to do during that time, just to kind of get away from the office. So I think that kind of motivated me to get through all of it. But yeah, no, I definitely feel you on that.
So what were some of your biggest takeaways from our 6 months together?
I think the biggest one, and I think most people would probably agree, is that contrary to what it sounds like, positive psychology is not about being happy all the time. I think it's more about, you know, the power of possibility, and realizing that you have possibility and you have choices and that there's power in having choices in how you respond and react. I think another big one for me is that everything that we learned and everything that comes out of the subject of positive psychology is based in science. And I think, I know you remember that big 10-pound tome that we got during the course. You know, everything was backed up by research and studies and everything like that. And that, as a big science person myself, that was something that was really important to me. I also think that, you know, it's much easier to be negative. And, you know, based on what we learned in positive psychology, that's because it's what we're wired for. So it's easier to kind of go down that, you know, negative spiral and to, you know, think the worst and to go to that worst case scenario rather than really, you know, take the time, because that takes a lot of effort to kind of rewire your brain to go into the more positive space.
I think that if I recall correctly that, and I've probably read this elsewhere, maybe not in positive psychology, but definitely the neuroscience, right? That our brains are wired for negativity, that 80% of our thoughts are negative. Isn't that wild?
Yeah, that's crazy, but I'm actually not surprised. I mean, just based on my personal experience, my experience in working with coaching clients, it's, you know, it's hard. It's hard to switch that mindset over.
Yeah, because it is. It's like, and listeners, if you're like, why, you know, why is it like that? Or, you know, why are we wired that way? Evolutionarily, it's what allowed us to survive, right? By looking for threats. And so now we're still wired that way. And, you know, we're always kind of like looking out for what's wrong and, versus what's right. And so I just thought that was really interesting. And, you know, listeners, if you're interested, someone who talks a lot about this and, you know, wrote a whole book about it is Rick Hansen, and it's called Buddha's Brain. And he's a neuroscientist. And so it's really great because the good news is that we can rewire our brain. I mean, we're still going to have probably that leaning, but we can, you know, try to be more aware of that and carve new neural pathways.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, that kind of goes back to the idea of having a choice about how you respond instead of just automatically going to that negative space. You know, there may be some instances where it's helpful. I'm sure those are they're few and far between in the world that we live in today. But being able to have those choices to decide, okay, I'm not just going to automatically go to that negative space. I'm going to, take that 1 second to decide, okay, I'd rather respond in this way.
Right. The respond versus react. Now, how are you incorporating the positive psychology pieces that you learned into your personal life and into your work as a coach?
Well, I have to say that in my personal life, I really think that it has been invaluable. So first, I would say, especially in the way that I relate to other people, and the way I communicate with other people. So, of course, coupled with my coaching training and, learning about things like active listening and how important that is. I think the way I, react to conversations, with my spouse, my very loving spouse. And also, thinking back on how, I would have responded to certain things, before, this positive psychology training and before coach training. Again, I just think it's been absolutely invaluable. And then as an entrepreneur, still kind of in my personal life, I've been focusing a lot on resilience recently. And I think that's really important as an entrepreneur. I'll say that I'm still a work in progress on that one. But, being aware and having these tools to kind of help me get through, some of the rough patches of being an entrepreneur has been, again, absolutely invaluable. And then I think for my work, positive psychology is definitely a foundation in my coaching work. For example, at the start of each coaching session, I might ask somebody, hey, what's good? And I think it definitely changes the tone of a conversation, especially if this particular individual has had a challenging week, or maybe weren't quite able to meet their goals, and things like that.
Yeah, I like that. Starting with what's good. I thought that was an interesting way to kind of look at a session and shift things. And then also the asking really, what do you want to get out of today's session? I think that's a super helpful way to start, just to make sure that they get what they need and that you're aware of what they need, and really that they have put some thought into it, because sometimes we don't necessarily know what we're looking for, and to get clear on that can be so helpful.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I know that in coaching, giving an individual that autonomy over a coaching session and over the decisions and over what we're going to be working on is super important.
Now, let's talk about your final project, which was adorable, by the way. And so can you tell our listeners what it was and what it is and what you're doing with it?
Yeah, so thank you so much. I appreciate that. So my final project was the creation of a journal called The Book of Extraordinary Things. And included in the journal are daily prompts based off of the PERMA principles that we learned in positive psychology. And for those who aren't familiar, PERMA stands for positivity, engagement, relationships, meaning, and achievement. So each of the 5 prompts, each of the 5 daily prompts corresponds to one of those principles.
And what about how we can find out about this project that you've created?
Yeah, so it's coming along nicely. I was actually so excited that having a final project in this class and kind of combining it with something that I was already motivated and inspired to do really helped get the momentum going. And I'm happy to say that the momentum has continued. So I'm currently getting ready to work with an artist starting next week to help me design a beautiful cover and some beautiful art for the interior, just to kind of go along with the, I call it vintage fantasy aesthetic that I'm going for. So if you want updates on the Book of Extraordinary Things, you can check out soon my website, which is alexisbuckles.com. I also post a lot of updates on my Instagram page, which is at alexisbuckles, and then also on my Living Well and Wild Facebook community, which you can find just by going to the search bar at the top of Facebook and typing in Living Well and Wild.
Thank you. Yeah, it's so cute. I look forward to seeing that come forth. What would you like others to know about positive psychology? Like, I'm just curious, with everything that you've learned, what do you wish others knew?
I think that having awareness about certain things is going to be key to really being able to use any of these tools that you learn. Or if, you're somebody who's interested in learning more about positive psychology, you're not just going to walk out of a course or, finish reading a book and snap your fingers and all of a sudden, you're going to have your rose-colored glasses on and everything's going to be great. But I think if you can have awareness, even if you're not able to respond in a situation the way you would have liked to, just knowing that you could do something different maybe the next time is really important. So basically, every time you try is going to help you the next time you try. And that also, I think, just from personal experience, even with all of the tools at your disposal and all these great things that, we talked about in positive psychology, the goal really is not to be a robot with just one emotion mode. I know that I've been so lucky and I feel so grateful to have these tools, but I still have moments where I get frustrated and moments where, maybe my resilience is low or my self-regulation is low. So, just again, I think that goes back to just at least if you have awareness about these things, that can help you potentially in the next situation you're in.
Yeah, I think that's a great reminder about recognizing patterns and triggers and, recognizing too that we have choice in it, even though sometimes it can be so frustrating because it's like, this is very deeply rooted and this is how I respond, but it's nice to know that if we take that pause, that we can begin to make some shifts in our patterns.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I took the course to support my work efforts primarily. But I think, all of the concepts and tools that come out of positive psychology are definitely just life enhancers. That's what I call them. And I think that anyone would benefit from, even some basic information about positive psychology.
And is there anything else you'd like to share about your experience with positive psychology in general?
Well, I really enjoyed the 6-month training course. I think not only being able to, go more in depth on the principles of positive psychology, but just being able to hear about how others have been applying it or how others may apply it and hear about other people's experiences was just absolutely fantastic. And I think that, even if the 6-month program is too much or maybe not for you or not for you right now, I think there's lots of resources out there. I do list some on my website. I have a little resources page with some books. So if you do go there, you can check that out as well. That again, even if your work doesn't necessarily pertain to something that would be directly associated with positive psychology. I know a lot of people that I talk to in the class were going to take that and use it in their personal life, or maybe try to start bringing to some of that into their work in terms of, again, how they relate to people, how they communicate to people, team building and things like that.
And then my last question for you, since the name of this podcast is Tranquility du Jour, I'm curious how you find tranquility in your everyday.
Well, I'm sure you may be able to relate to this one, but I feel like I find tranquility in those few moments that I have before I have to get out of the bed, which is hard because of what I'm about to tell you. When my 60-pound dog, has kind of got up there and pushed me over. So she has, taking up about 60% of our king size bed. So she's joined me for a cuddle in the morning. And our bedroom is very, very peaceful. The way the light comes in through the curtains and the windows. So I just think, having those few moments are so calm and peaceful. And I really appreciate when I get to have them.
Yeah. Starting a day with puppy cuddles. I mean, it's funny for me, we have 3 pugs and a double bed. So it's like ridiculous. And, it's like, yeah, my day often starts with like Belle in particular, like coming in and sitting on my head to let me know that she's ready to eat. So it's so funny. It's like, oh my God, let me sleep. But then, oh, but you're so warm and cuddly. So yeah, that does make for a wonderful start, unless it's like a little earlier than usual.
See, I'm lucky in the respect that my dog will not wake us up early. She won't get up until I get up. So it's nice if I want to sleep in, she's kind of right there with me. And I'm jealous of your 3 dogs. I wish I had more. But then I think my husband would probably be sleeping on the couch at that point. So
Right, yeah. Yeah, and sometimes it's funny. It's like we'll be brushing our teeth and then we'll go in and they've already gotten into bed and there's like literally nowhere for us to go. And, it's like, oh, Lordy. So we're moving them around and then they're grumbling because they're pugs. And, it's so funny. Sometimes you're just like, am I on candid camera? Like, is this all just like a cruel joke, Especially when Belle goes through her phase of like 4 a.m.s. Like for a while, this was probably for a month, Alexis. It was horrible. She was like 4 a.m. She would just wake up and that's when she wanted to eat. So I'd have to like feed her a little bit and then go back to bed if I could fall back asleep. But then we traveled and that got her out of it. Thank God.
oh goodness, no, 4 a.m. is painful. I'm not a morning person, so no, that would not work.
Right. They have their own little clocks, I think. Well, thank you so much, Alexis, for sharing kind of, the way in which you have incorporated all the training that we had and, and for the work that you're doing in the world and for being such a good friend to the animals.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me, Kimberly. And yeah, I was so happy to connect with you. I mean, I know we were both there for the positive psychology course, but I was so happy to find another vegan, another plant-based person in the class. And also I have to say, I have so much respect for what you do and for everything that you do for the animals. And I just can't wait to see what you come up with next.
Welcome, Alisha.
Thank you so much for having me.
So tell me a little bit about what drew you to positive psychology and commuting from freaking North Carolina to DC for 7 weekends.
That's a great question. Well, I've always loved psychology. I fell in love with it probably my senior year of high school. I had the most fantastic psychology teacher, Mr. Clark, and he taught in such a way that learning just clicked for me in a way that it had never clicked in any other subject. And I've always been I've always loved English and things in arts, but there was something about psychology that was amazing. So I was actually a psychology major in college, but this thing happened where the psychology that I was studying in college, what was available to me class-wise, seemed to really focus on what was wrong with people. And that didn't appeal to me as a career. So even though I was in love with the study of how the brain works and what makes people tick, I'm someone that's really action oriented and I wanted to really focus on things that would make people better, but I didn't have that vocabulary at the time. So you and I were actually in a mentoring session and you told me about this positive psychology certification program. And I was like, oh my goodness, I know I have to do this because it sounds exactly like what I'm up to and the focus that I would like to continue on. And so I went home and researched it and thought, I'm going to do this. And there actually was one that was starting in North Carolina, but it wasn't going to be starting until almost a year after. The DC cohort started in October and the one in North Carolina wasn't going to start till February. And I knew I didn't want to wait to learn about positive psychology. So that's kind of what drew me to it was, you were a big catalyst in that, but I've always loved psychology.
Yeah. And, it's funny that, that we just I randomly brought it up and then here you were, driving. How many hours was it back and forth each weekend?
It was almost 6 hours every weekend. And it was great because I wanted to get to know you better. And then when Carol was a part of it, I just knew that it was going to be a pretty neat time. And I have friends in DC, so I figured it would be an opportunity to just deepen relationships along with learning learning something that I was really, really interested in.
And so what would you say are some of your biggest takeaways from these 6 months?
One of the biggest takeaways is that I am more in love with the study of psychology than I've ever been. So it's been a really personal aha for me that this is something that I need to go deeper in, that I probably want to get my master's in. So I'm exploring ways to do that. But another thing that it confirmed for me was the science behind a lot of the tools that I was already using with clients. It gave me a framework of language to talk about the scientific research that supports and backs up why things like art journaling and visualization are important, or the science behind why gratitude journaling works, or the science behind, the actual data and research studies behind why lots of techniques that a lot of coaches use actually work. Those are really big takeaways. It changes lives, I think. It really, there's a tagline, it's helping people move north of neutral to flourish. And I think that's what it does. And that's why it's such an exciting field.
You know what? Whenever you mentioned art journaling, it reminded me that we were on kind of like the visualization, vision board sort of module while I was in Costa Rica leading a retreat. And of course, we were doing art journaling. And so I was able to come back to them and let them know that the data shows actually that it's not so much the end result that you want to have images of, but kind of the process of getting to it that tends to be more transformative and actually help people achieve the goal, which I thought that was really interesting and honestly a bit surprising.
Yeah, that actually blew me away. And I've loved getting to talk about that as well in the art journaling workshops that I lead too. I mean, I think that that's such an interesting piece to it. So it's one of those techniques that I've started using for myself. So for instance, if there's something that I want to create in my life, which I'm also an entrepreneur, so there's lots of things that I am excited about creating in my life. So during my meditation time, especially if I'm feeling fearful about anything, I start bringing in the visualization into my meditation of the steps that it will take to get me to where I want to go, not just in art journaling, but in my meditation as well.
And how are you incorporating this work in your personal life and in your work as a coach?
Oh my goodness. I feel like there's so many ways. I do group coaching and individual coaching, and then I lead workshops and lunch and learns. So I've been talking a lot about gratitude journaling and the science behind gratitude journaling. I've even built in time into some of my group coaching programs to gratitude journal. I was really struck by, kind of like you were with the visualization, with gratitude journaling, how important it is not just to say what you're thankful for and what you're grateful for, but why you're grateful for it and then what you did to bring it into your life. I think that so often we just say we're grateful for something, but that leaves out the agency. We don't see how the actions that we've been taking in our lives have brought that into where we are. And I think by adding those two additional pieces, why we're grateful for it and what we did to bring it into our life, are really powerful tools that give people agency over the life that they're creating. So I'd certainly bring that into coaching, into group coaching, as well as individual coaching. I also am talking a lot more about the science and the case studies. So I think that people are hungry for that knowledge. It's, so much of the work that we do as coaches, I think people they like it, but when you can give them the data behind why it works, it just makes it that much more powerful. So an example of that would be the mindfulness aspect. There's a lot of research and data that backs up mindfulness. And I know in positive psychology, they make a distinction between meditation and mindfulness. I don't necessarily think that that's a necessary thing to do, but whatever you want to call it, having the science that backs up those practices, I think makes it much more powerful for the people that are that are using those practices.
Absolutely. And, even with science, it was interesting. And I think it was in the goal setting piece where it was like, if you use an accountability buddy, you're 243% more likely to actually achieve your goal. And I may be getting the statistic wrong. It was 243 for that or writing a contract to yourself. But either way, it was like massive data where I was like, oh my gosh, it's, and also using primers, right? Things that remind us about our goals, and they have data that's like, and you're X percentage more likely to achieve it if you do this. And I just love that. As you said, I mean, people, they know that these things are important, but yet when there's science behind it, it just is like, oh, okay, I can totally get behind this.
Exactly. And, then you and I talked about, one thing for me is I really wanted to do like vegetarian light. And you very kindly offered to be my accountability buddy. And I stayed on track with that for a really long time. Kind of dropped off, but have been getting back on the wagon. But in the beginning of that, knowing that I could just check in and tell you what my wins were, or just knowing that you were available to that as my friend was, it made it more exciting to take part in the thing that I wanted to take part in.
Yeah, I loved receiving your text message with like all the emojis. So tell us about your final project, right? So we had to do this project that was a representation of our work. And what did you come up with?
Yeah, mine is still a work in progress, and it's going to take some time. I maybe even underestimated. And with our final project, the great thing about CAP is that the final project could be a presentation of what you were working on. So because I'm a coach, one of my big goals, personal goals, is to create a signature coaching program. And for me, big aspects of pillars of my coaching are creativity, yoga, and of course, the positive psychology. So I'm working to create a 9-month-long 9-month-long coaching program that will weave in those pillars. And I did some initial research. I interviewed 52 women actually on what they would be looking for and the topics that they would want covered in that type of 9-month program. I'm creating a workbook that will go along with that coaching program, and I'm hopefully going to be launching it probably in September. I'd wanted to launch a full-blown program, but I'll probably be launching a beta coaching program next year. So that's what I'm working on, just a way to use these tools along with creativity and yoga in our daily life to flourish.
Great. I love that. And, it's really smart too to do a beta program, to just do a little launching to see like, how does this feel? And where could there be tweaks and whatnot? That's super smart.
Thank you.
Now, what would you like others to know about positive psychology?
They tell you in the very beginning of the program that I believe Chris Peterson said it. He said that if you could sum up positive psychology in 3 words, it's that other people matter. And I think that's one of the most powerful things about positive psychology is that it really brings home and hammers home the idea how important our relationships are in everything that we do to our flourishing. And it gives you a lot of really great tools to enhance relationships and to cultivate relationships. And I was really struck by the fact that loneliness is more detrimental to our health than smoking. That was something that really stuck with me from the program. So it's just a reminder to, whether in a positive psychology certification class or not, to really cultivate your relationships.
And anything else that you would like to share kind of about your experience in general with the positive psychology program?
It's really fun.
Yeah. But it was a lot of work, right? I mean, it's like 240 hours.
Yeah. So the coolest part for me, and this is totally a personal journey piece, is that it was such a confirmation that I loved it, because there was never an aspect of it that felt like work. All of the reading, all of the homework. I mean, my only criticism would be that our cohort met on Tuesday nights for our Zoom call past my bedtime. But I'm an early to bed, early to rise kind of person. So that was the only part that really felt like work, was actually getting on a call past my bedtime. But, if you're excited about this work, it's so much fun and it doesn't actually feel like work.
Anything else that you that's coming to mind to you with regard to positive psychology? Like, and what I'm curious about are any resources. Like, are there any books or websites that you're like, oh, if you're interested in it, you must read this, or you must watch this, or you must check out this website?
Yeah, the book Flow by Mike Csikszentmihalyi, I believe that's how you say his name, was a really powerful book. And it talks about getting into flow states, and it talks a lot about flow states from an athletic perspective, but how important getting in those flow states can be. I think that that's a really great book to read.
And my last question for you, Alisha, is, of course, the name of this podcast is Tranquility du Jour. So how do you find tranquility in your everyday?
I am so honored to get to answer this question. So I find tranquility every day by living a life with abundance and an abundant mindset, trying to share my best self with the world. And as an entrepreneur, believing that the wins of others are things that I should be celebrating. And the thought that Robert Ingersoll said, we rise by lifting others. And I really believe that that's true. And that's the attitude and the mindset that I want to take out into the world and make sure I am kind of contagious with that abundant mindset and the mindset of rising by lifting others.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
So savvy sources, you can find Carol at carolmyers.com, Alexis at livingwellandwild.com, and Alisha at yokeandabundance.com. There's also a link to the certificate in applied positive psychology and a link to the Via Character Strength assessment that Carol mentioned, and then also a link to Flow by Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi, and then just a couple of articles I thought you might enjoy about positive psychology. So finally, you can find me over on Instagram at Tranquility du Jour, at Pinterest, on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. If you would like a little dose of love of tranquility, kind of sent into your inbox every other week, you can sign up for that at KimberlyWilson.com/love notes. And it also gives you access to Tranquil Treasures, which is a library filled with MP3s, videos, and more to help find a bit more tranquility in the everyday. And finally, if you have a moment to pen a review on iTunes or share this podcast via social media, would be so grateful. Hopefully it helps others find tranquility, or to pen a review of any of my books on Amazon or Goodreads. And I have a link to both of those in the show notes, KimberlyWilson.com/TDJ433. There's also a link to Tranquility, my seasonless, vegan, locally made, eco-friendly clothing line, a link to my books and e-courses, the Tranquility du Jour podcast app, and my crazy passion for animals. So thank you as always for being here with us. Thank you for being here with me for, my goodness, 13 years now, since 2005. It's been an absolute delight. And I wish you an amazing week ahead. Happy November, and namaste.